Welcome to Travel Devil. I'm your host Clara Francken, and in a world full of mass tourism, we're here to talk about unconventional travel. Let's get into it. Did you ever consider doing a long distance bicycle tour? Then this episode is for you. And even if you're not, my guest William shares some incredible stories which will surprise you. After cycling more than 100,000 kilometers across 23 countries, he knows quite a lot about bicycle touring. In today's episode, we're talking about his journey between England and India in the 1970s. A 14,000 kilometers road about which he wrote an Amazon best-selling book, Far Sweeter Than Honey. Let's get into it. Hi William, can you start by introducing yourself to my listeners?
My name is William Spencer. I'm originally from England. I now live in the United States, not far from New York City, out in the countryside. My wife is from Manhattan, and we met when we were both living in India, which is how come I ended up here in America. And for my work, I've done a corporate consulting work, organizational change, and training of thousands of people. In many ways, my work has been linked to my early start in life, including my cycling and my interest in people.
Now let's go back to the beginning of your story. And what made you want to start doing this long distance bicycle journey? So can you tell me, why did you decide to leave England to cycle to India?
Since I was a little boy, I've been very interested in India. I can't fully explain why. And in those days, India was possible to travel to from Europe, and many people did. It was the thing to do if you were young and searching for answers in life more than just a regular, going to work and having a regular lifestyle. So when I was 22, I left England. I did the journey. It took me almost a year, 360 days, and I cycled through Europe, Italy, Yugoslavia, into Greece, into Turkey, and then it was getting very cold, and I'd met a friend from the Netherlands, Rudy. So Rudy and I agreed we were going to travel to Israel to go to a kibbutz for the winter. So then we went south through Syria, Jordan, into Israel. Rudy had to leave from Israel because his father was very unwell. And then I went back up through Syria, Jordan, into Turkey again, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. About 8,500, about 12,000 kilometers.
Awesome. Yeah, that's quite a long road. Okay. And why did you choose to travel by bike for such a long distance?
I've always loved the bicycle. Interestingly, so I grew up, my parents were alcoholic, and the house that I grew up in was kind of crazy for that reason. And from an early age, I learned that being on a bicycle and cycling away from this crazy place led me to feel settled, safe, calm, alive, independent, in charge of things myself. And so from early on, I started to use cycling. I'd go away for the entire day as a way to find a more peaceful environment for myself. And that, continued later. So many years later, when I then wanted to go on this odyssey, it was kind of an obvious thing for me to go by bike.
Thanks for sharing that.
I think there's a part of a human being that yearns to face dragons, face difficulties, face the mountains. And the bicycle is a great way to do that, is a great way to have a real adventure where you are fully in contact with the elements, with the people, with the weather, with the landscape.
Okay, so that's the start of your journey. Now, before we dive deeper into that, you consider yourself as doing bicycle touring. Could you explain my listeners and me maybe what is the difference between what you are doing and bike packing to clear the air?
Well, it's a really interesting question for me. The difference is that I see it's a bit like the tiny house or a regular house, right? There's the tiny house movement where people want to live in a small house so they have less things and have a simpler life. In the same way, I see bike packing is you travel with the minimal amount possible, and you travel with a bike with bigger tires so that you can go on more places places without roads, that more wilderness, more rough places, particularly in places like Africa and Asia, where there's less roads. But the interesting thing for me, anyway, is the difference doesn't matter so much, because my own experience was that I did what we call bicycle touring, but I got the absolute minimum amount to carry. And I also was very adventurous about using my bike with regular sized tires to go in wild places. So maybe the difference doesn't matter so much, but I understand that bikepacking is more minimal and being able to go on unsurfaced roads.
Okay, so actually the difference is less big than I thought, because I was thinking that bicycle touring was more about having bigger bags, maybe a little bit fancier, and then bikepacking would be more just like hit a road on your bicycle without so much luggage and fancy equipment.
Yeah, well, maybe that is a difference, but there's a lot of people who do bike touring who travel on bikes that cost €100, and they have old luggage, and they have, some of them have no luggage, they just have what they have. I've seen people on Facebook from less developed countries who get any bike they can and find any way of carrying the luggage. There's a lot of discussion online about the bike that you should buy and the equipment that you should buy. And in my view, that doesn't really matter very much, because if you spend €2,000, $2,000 on a bike, or you spend 200, when you meet your first hill, you're going to struggle going up it. You have to use your legs. It's going to be hard work. There's no difference. And so I think the idea of, is an expensive bike, is it this equipment, is it that equipment, doesn't really matter so much, because you can take almost any bike. The bike that I cycled from England to India on cost about $120 in today's money. And I had no fancy equipment. My backpacks were old shoulder bags from an army surplus store that I put aluminium hooks on. So the bigger question is, can you just take what you've got and just go?
Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah, good answer. Now, talking about your trip to India, can you take us back and talk through the struggles you had to overcome on the road?
Probably the number one difficulty for me was culture shock. And there's two sides to this: the personal space issue and how we dressed. In Turkey and other countries, people stood too close. And in England, we're used to standing much further apart. They would not respect one's personal space. They would touch my things, touch my bicycle. One time in Pakistan, I came back to the place where I was staying to find that my host family had opened my bicycle bags and were reading my personal letters, which obviously in Western Europe would be a real invasion of personal space, and nobody would do it. Being able to better understand that it was a cultural issue rather than taking it as a deep personal insult or a threat when people stood really close to me. The second side of this was how we dressed. We came to understand that wearing short trousers with bare legs or short sleeve shirts with bare arms was really, really offensive to local people. We had no idea to start with, and people were throwing stones, and there was even bricks thrown at us one time from a passing truck. And it wasn't until a local person explained that this was very offensive to the Islamic sensibilities, and that if we'd been local people, we would have actually been physically harmed for dressing in that way. So what we did about it was we started to wear long trousers and long sleeve shirts, even though that was a little uncomfortable in the really hot weather. But it was a small price to pay to be appropriate and to conform to the local culture.
And also, it was a different day and age, and even today we expect people to dress a certain way here, so I guess it's normal that we also have to adapt when we go there.
I mean, I was a young man. I'd only ever been in England. I traveled a little to Switzerland and Netherlands and Belgium, France. But moving into Turkey, Syria, the Middle East, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, culture really is different. They speak very, very loud, and they do things, they ask you questions, very personal questions, that would be very different from anything in England. So when that happens, or when that happened to me, it was very threatening to start with, and actually continued to be threatening, even though I started to understand that it was just a difference in culture. In England, where people are more reserved, you don't talk about certain things, you don't ask about certain things.
Could you give me an example?
Yeah, well, a lot of the young men I would meet of my own age in Islamic countries wanted to know a lot of details about dating and girls and girlfriends and boyfriends, and particularly there was a very strong interest in sex. And I actually had a picture of a girlfriend with me, and I learned not to show it, because if I showed the picture of the girlfriend, the first question always was, well, have you slept with her? And that's not a conversation that you would have in the UK. And it was, it's difficult and threatening. It was difficult and threatening for me.
I guess it's fun for a while, but yeah, it's not a conversation you want to keep having. I also imagine that such a big culture shock can be scary because you're super vulnerable on your bicycle, alone, in a country with different norms and a different language.
Culture really is different, and it was very threatening at times to me, because you're there, you're on your own, you're on a bicycle, and you don't know the rules of the game, as it were. You don't know how things work there. And I think the way that I dealt with that was to ask questions and to be curious and to learn about the local culture, because it's very easy when you're threatened with culture shock to be judgmental and retreat into yourself and think, well, they're crazy, that's wrong, how come they're like that? If internally you start doing that, then you're going to have a very hard time. If you can take a deep breath, ask a question, listen, you're then able to learn and to adapt to the culture. Another danger, which is more kind of obvious, was dogs. Particularly in the Middle East and beyond, where wild dogs come in big packs. The best thing to do is, if you can, easily and safely go faster and get away from them, you do. But many times you can't. So then the best thing to do is to stop, because a dog is a lot less interested in a bike or in a person that is not moving than one that is moving. There's something about the moving bike and the gears and everything. It just makes a dog crazy. So you stop. In France, I picked up some stones and threw stones at the dog. You didn't have to hit them, just throw them nearby, and the dogs would run away. And interestingly, they would yelp as if they'd been hit, even though the stone didn't hit them. And then later on, I just accidentally discovered that if I didn't have any stones, if I just moved my hand like I was going to throw a stone, like that, but there was no stone, the dog would yelp and run away as if there had really been a stone. So it's almost like dogs understand that people throw stones at them, and when they do, they should move away.
Okay, that's a really good tip. I hope I will never need it, but I will remember it if I ever have a dangerous encounter with dogs. Did you actually ever have a dangerous encounter with dogs yourself, which was really dangerous?
In the book, I tell one story about being in Iran when there was a big pack of dogs, and it really was dangerous, because they were what's called Caucasian mountain dogs, which are 1.5 meters high, big broad heads, big teeth, very scary dogs. And this was a big pack of 17, 18 or more of these dogs. And in that case, because I was almost at the top of a hill, and because they really did look dangerous, I decided to go fast and to go beyond them. And I was able to get away, and thank goodness, because I don't think they would have stopped running at me and attacking if I just stood still, because they really did seem very, very angry, these dogs. So that was one time when going fast was the answer to getting away.
Okay, now when hearing all of these challenges, how did you feel safe when you were traveling solo?
One of the things that I think is true about the bicycle, and it's very true when you're on your own, is somehow people know that when you're on a bicycle, you're vulnerable. And I think that's part of what brings out the best in people, is if you're if you're traveling and you've got a fancy car and you're very well protected, then maybe you receive less kindness. But when people see you on a bicycle, they know that you're alone. They know that you're powerless. They know that a car can hit you and kill you, and they know that it takes real work to go distances. So I think that's one of the reasons that people look after people on bicycles. Yeah.
And that's beautiful, actually. Could you actually tell us why or how solo bicycle touring and cycling in general has changed the way you look at life?
It's a lovely question, Clara, because biking has changed my life because it's made me aware that I can do more things than I thought was possible. I can go further. I can climb more mountains. It's also created a real love of nature and being outside for me. And it's led me to be more interested in sustainability and protecting the wonderful world that I experienced as I cycled. Many of us, and I do it in some circumstances too, before we even try something, we say no before life says no. In other words, we think, well, can I go there? Can I go meet this person? Oh no, I shouldn't do that. On the bicycle, in a way, a long distance bicycle trip trains you to wait until the road says no. And if you do that many, many times, there's an answer or something unexpected happens, because you never know who will help you, the wind that will suddenly come and push you from behind, the kind person, the downhill stretch, the unexpected place to put your tent at night. There's so many good things that can happen. And so, yeah.
So, bicycle touring taught you to say yes instead of no and to appreciate nature more. That's beautiful. And I'm also interested in your budget. Could you open up a little bit more about which budget is needed to go bicycle touring? Do you have some numbers you can disclose?
It's different if you're in a more developed country or a less developed country, but I would say in a more developed country, if you have a tent and a thing, a method to cook with, the earning expenses really are food and supplies. Like I would say in Europe, 15 to 20, if you're super, if you want to have a really good life, €25 a day. If you're super, super careful, you could probably do an even less than that. People will, when you're on the bicycle, people will treat you well and will buy you food and offer you things. So I think, 15 to 25 maximum euro a day. And if you're in less developed countries, 15 to 20, maybe even €10 if you're really, really careful. I mean, when I did my bicycle trip to India, my budget ended up being about €3 a day in the end, €3 or €4 a day. Of course, in addition to that, if you're budgeting ahead of time, you need to think your other major expenses. You need to have an emergency fund for if you get into difficulty, to be able to take a train. If you become sick, or if you're going through an area that the local people tell you is dangerous, you should have money to take a train, put your bike on a train, take a train. And then, of course, if you're going one way somewhere, you need enough money to take a plane back home, or having somebody ready to help pay for an air ticket for you to get home, should that ever be needed. But otherwise, if you're doing a round trip, then it's really just that daily amount of money.
Yeah. It's definitely good to have an emergency fund somewhere just in case. I guess you also need to put some money inside. I don't know if you would do that in this emergency fund or not, but if you need some bicycle repairs. So what do you do? How do you budget the money you need for the repairal of your bike?
One of the great things about being on a bike, particularly if you have a basic bike, is it can be fixed anywhere, and fixing a bike is never that expensive. Now, on Facebook, I read some people who are talking about buying a €12,000 carbon fiber bike. Bikes like that cost a lot of money can have problems that cost a lot of money to repair. But on a basic bike, really, you have maybe €30 of spares that you carry with you. The interesting thing on a bicycle is the things that are going to break are fairly commonly understood, and you can take the spare things with you. I travel with an extra brake cable or two and a gear cable because they break, extra spokes. So I can put a spoke because a spoke sometimes will break. And I would say it's good to learn how to do the basic repairs yourself. Not only because it's cheaper, but because you may be somewhere where there is no bicycle shop.
Okay. And if we look at today, not being 22 anymore, if I may disclose, how do you budget your more recent trips?
Because I loved my earlier journeys where I was wild camping and I never knew where I stayed every night, I get a little bit of a flavor of that when I credit card cycle, big credit card touring. But because what I do is I don't plan ahead where I'm going to stay. I don't book hotels. I don't do Airbnbs. I have my phone, and at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I start to look on my phone. Where is there places? Where can I go stay? And I phone. And sometimes people say, "Oh, you shouldn't be calling so late. You need to call 2 weeks in advance." Fine, but it always works out. I always find somewhere to stay. And sometimes you have to cycle a little further or cycle off the way you wanted to go. So for me, even though that's credit card touring, you still have the adventure of finding unexplained places. Sometimes I'd stayed in a couple of times in a very, very rundown B&B. One time in France, there was bed bugs in the bed and rats running through the roof at night. And it was, for me, that's part of the adventure.
Okay, I've never heard of the term credit card touring before, but it sounds like fun too, if you can afford it, and it's great. So now I've got another question. Do you believe that you need to be young and in perfect condition to go bicycle touring?
Well, I hope not, because I'm still doing it now because we can and because we prefer. My wife and we'll stay in a hotel. But no, there's no age. A lot of people, even if they've got a bit of health problems or they're overweight or whatever, the bicycle is a great way to become strong and fit. One of the things that amazed me on my bicycle journey when I was younger was how quickly, particularly if you cycle day after day after day, how quickly the bicycle makes you strong and helps you be fit.
That's good to hear. So anyone who is listening now, you can start today. This is your message. Now, William, could you also share a story of a more recent journey which you really enjoyed?
One trip I'm really interested in, I've actually done pieces of it several times, but I did the whole thing in one section a few years ago, and that's the way to Compostela in northern Spain. It's become quite famous, actually. When I did the whole thing, I bought a bicycle in Toulouse, South France, cycled across the Pyrenees, across northern Spain, and then when I got to Santiago de Compostela, I sold the bike. Now, one of the reasons that's such a beautiful journey to do is, well, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, France is very different from Spain. So in France, things are much more green, much more pleasant. It may be the most beautiful country in the world to cycle in France, really. And people are very friendly and generally, kind and considerate towards cyclists in France. And so you've got France, and then Spain is much drier, particularly the first part of northern Spain is much drier and very different. But all of it's wonderful to do because you are treated by people as a pilgrim. I carried a shell that shows that you're a pilgrim, a scallop shell. In France, it's called les pèlerins, the pilgrims. You can stay at places for les pèlerins. And then in Spain, the government now has set up a series of very well set up youth hostels or hostels to stay at very like €5 to €8 a night. So I really love that journey because it combines, for me, the bicycle, nature, the idea of having a goal, a spiritual goal, if you like, about being a pilgrim. Although that's not really necessary. You don't have to see life that way to enjoy it. And so I would say that's one of the most enjoyable trips that I've done in the past few years.
That's great inspiration for a future trip, actually. Thank you. And now that we all know that it's possible to go on a bicycle and just leave, what would you tell somebody who feels inspired to start their journey?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to say a little briefly about two things that I posted on Facebook that have received about 1,500 likes and about 500 comments. So these are my three laws of long distance bicycling, right? The first is that most people you come across are going to be good and kind to you, particularly out in the countryside. The second is that I learned, and you will learn on a bicycle, that there's always something you can do for yourself. You know, when you're lonely, afraid, ill, exhausted, there are things that you can do. And when you're on the bicycle, you have to do them, and you learn that you can keep going and that you've got more inside you than you might think. And then the third idea is that the bicycle really teaches you to stay in the present moment. When you're cycling up a long mountain climb, there's no room for anything else other than focusing on the road, focusing on your breathing, focusing on your solar plexus, focusing on your legs. And in that way, there's a lot of talk about meditation and staying in the present moment these days. But on the bicycle, it's teaching you to do that very naturally and organically.
Thank you. And what would you say to somebody who isn't fully convinced yet? Give like a pep talk to my listeners who are interested but need a little push in the right direction. Could you do that?
It's very unlikely you will ever meet anybody who tells you a story of regretting to go on a bike trip. And why is that? It changes your view on other people. It changes your view on yourself. And what I learned in my life was, even though I left the workforce for a couple of years, the experiences, what I learned, the attitudes I developed, helped me be successful in my career. And I would say, if you're going to be purely economic, I would say that the money I earned from the attitudes and skills I got from being on my bike more than paid for the loss of income while I was there. Get on your bicycle, try and do it. Do a short trip, do a long trip, do whatever you can do, and just see how it makes you feel.
And do you have a challenge for these people who now want to try long distance cycling or bicycle touring in general?
I would say don't try and push yourself, because your body will very, very slowly get stronger and stronger. You actually don't even need to prepare very much, because if you start out and just take it easy, the bicycle will slowly make you, stronger. So my challenge would be, get a bicycle and do it. Just go for a long day to start with. Just round trip back and forth from your house. And then when you get comfortable with that, try, taking a tent with you. Cycle somewhere one day, cycle back the next day. Everybody as a child dreams about flying. But on a bicycle, when you're going downhill on a bicycle, your brain and your eyes are like a bird. You're flying through the air. And it's the most fantastic feeling. And so just do it. Try it.
Oh my God, I just get so excited that I want to jump on my bicycle right now. Okay, thank you so much for all this information and for your stories. Now, at the beginning of this episode, I also mentioned that, you have a book out in which you share your full experience on a bicycle between England and India. So to close up the interview, I loved reading it. And now could you tell us a little bit more about why my listeners should read it too?
Yeah, well, if you're interested in bicycle touring and you're interested in traveling, you should read the book, because it'll give you a very clear idea about what it's like to cycle long distance. It'll also give you some very practical tips. And I think it will inspire you to go and cycle.
Beautiful. And we can also listen to the audiobook available online. Let me insert a short clip of that.
To set the context, I'm in Iran in an area of semi-desert. Being alone on the road provides time for introspection. I think about the future. What will I do? Where will I live? And what kind of a life do I want? On this empty plain, an intuition arises and grows stronger with time. My future wife awaits me in India. As I cycle through the barren landscape, I picture us together. We recline on silk cushions, drinking chai. Parrots screech in a mango tree outside. Cafe au lait coloured children play in the garden. It's a good life. It'll be another 14 years before I marry an American girl from Manhattan. But she is, indeed, in India at this time, and that's where we'll meet.
Yeah, I loved re-listening to that after reading your book a while ago. Now I see things have come full circle. How beautiful is that you met your wife in India and now you're still doing bicycle trips together. That's goals. Now, to finish off this episode, I've got some rapid questions. These are very quick questions I ask all of my guests. So if you're ready, let's go. How old are you now?
66.
How old were you the first time you traveled to another continent?
14.
What's the longest time you've been away from home?
3 years.
Would you rather save money on accommodation or pay for a good bed?
Save money on accommodation.
What word would you teach a foreigner who wants to learn your language?
Friend. Because friendship, when you're traveling with strangers, is really important. And so you want to have somebody be able to say the word friend.
What can't you travel without? What do you always need by your side when you're traveling?
A stainless steel flask full of tea.
What's your favorite travel song?
I think Simon & Garfunkel, The Boxer.
Okay, I will add that to my travel playlist. And now last question. Why do you travel?
I travel to challenge my own view of the world and to learn and grow by being exposed to new things, uncertain things, new people.
Now, if you want to get in contact with William Spencer or find out more about his book, you can find the links in the show notes. And we also made a video together 2 years ago, which is available on YouTube. And I will also link that in the show notes. This was Travel Devil, brought to you by me, your host, Clara Francken. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to continue the conversation or suggest any future guest, you can go to my Instagram, @Clara Francken. Take care, and I will see you next Thursday.